Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Working in UX Design, where we interview practitioners working in user experience design here in this Asia-Pacific region. With me, I have Atiqah Khalim, who is a senior UX designer at Shopee, and I am your host, Dalen, where I've been interviewing different practitioners on a monthly basis for more than a year now. So tonight, let me introduce to you Atiqah's background. She actually started as a visual designer and eventually transitioned into a full-time UX designer in companies like Razer and Shopee. And I've actually met Atiqah way earlier before Razer, where she actually attended a class I was teaching for a private institute here in Singapore. You could say it's sort of come full circle that I have the opportunity to see how her career has progressed and to be able to interview her and hear her thoughts. And today, she's currently working at one of Asia's largest e-commerce platforms, Shopee, as a senior UX designer in charge of crafting key payment pages and flows to support transactions across the Shopee app and ShopeePay and other digital products. As a designer, Atiqah is also involved in design across the brand's different platforms, including Shopee App, the web, the mobile web design, and we'll have an opportunity to ask a little bit about that from her. She is also an active role model in the Muslim community, where she's one of the co-founders of Malay Designers in SG, which means Malay Designers in Singapore, a group of current and aspiring Malay Muslim designers. She also used to volunteer for the Codette Project, a nonprofit ground-up initiative that aims to get more minority Muslim women into technology. So we'll have the opportunity to ask her a little bit about some of these community initiatives that she is on, as well as how she transitioned and got her career into UX design and her interest in gaming in this session itself. So without further ado, let's welcome Atiqah into our show. Just to also add, I'm quite glad that Atiqah has recently joined us as a co-instructor in our program, where we run our 4-month part-time program for mid-career professionals who want to transition into UX design. So welcome to the show, Atiqah. I'm glad to be having you here tonight.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Thanks for the warm introduction. I'm really glad to be able to speak to everyone today, and I'm excited to share my experience. Yeah. So, where should we begin? Should I talk about my journey, like how I transitioned?
Let's start with that. I think it really makes a lot of sense for.
Okay, sure, that's great. So, maybe I'll start with my education background. I know that I worked as a visual designer for a bit, but to be very honest, I majored in political science back in the National University of Singapore. So I don't have any formal, degree that is specifically for design. In fact, I was doing social sciences, right? But then I had a bit of, I guess I did a bit of soul searching because I wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue political science professionally. Part of the reason is also because I didn't do so well academically in my major. So I thought maybe I wanted to pursue something that I was more interested in. So I looked back at my hobbies and I realized, okay, what do I like? I realized that growing up, I like to play around with Adobe Photoshop to design things like block schemes, to design things like banners for student activities and events, for t-shirts and posters. So I realized that this is a hobby that I could turn into a career, right? So I spoke to different professionals around me who worked as graphic designers. I was asking them, should I join like this industry? Should I be a graphic designer? And almost every single one of them said, are you sure you want to do this? Because we are formally trained in this and we can tell you that it's very stressful, very demanding. And we're not sure if you can handle this because you don't come from the same background. Okay, so to be honest, like that was quite, it kind of made me feel demotivated a bit, but I thought, you know what, I'm just going to give it a go. I'm going to take up an internship in graphic design and see if this is something that I like. So in my final year of university, so that's my 4th year, right? I took this big risk of balancing my final year with an internship as a graphic designer in a local startup called Popsicle. So it's a startup that creates karaoke products, kind of like Spotify for karaoke. So yeah, it was quite, it was a huge risk because I had to, it was my honors year. So I had to write a thesis, I had to do very difficult modules and all that. So the thing is, in that semester, I did badly for my grades, but I thrived a lot in my internship as a graphic designer. So I did really well. And I got a lot of mentorship from my colleagues who also came from a lot of interesting backgrounds as well. Like some of them were previously in Grab, some I think attended Harvard Business School before. So I was surrounded by all these very inspiring people who actually, they kept pushing me to pursue like graphic design. But then there was one specific senior of mine who was a UX designer. He said, hey, why not you try and explore UX design? Because, okay, it's great that you're interested in graphic design, but right now UX is booming and tech is also booming in Singapore, in Southeast Asia actually. And also you're doing political science, right? I mean, I was doing political science, and there is some parts of political science that's actually quite relevant to UX design as well, which is mostly on like human behavior and psychology, decision making and stuff like that. So I thought, yeah, UX design sounds like the perfect intersection between all my different interests, because I do like to do a bit of graphic design, and I do like gaming and tech, and UX is actually quite important in gaming. I think we'll talk about that later. And yeah, it's true. Like I do enjoy some of the human behavior stuff in social sciences. So all of these 3 things can actually be really helpful in UX design. So I thought, why not give UX design a go? So in my internship in that startup, I received some like on-the-job training, and they also sponsored me. Like, okay, they actually sponsored me for this class, UX class, which Dylan was the instructor. So that's how I got to know him. And that was the beginning of my journey, eventually getting into Razer and then eventually getting into Shopee.
I'm not aware you were still an intern back then. I thought you were working full-time for them.
Oh, I was an intern before, and then I became a full-timer. And then during the full-time job, they sent me as a UX. Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. And I mean, thanks for sharing your journey. I was just wondering, what's the toughest part of first transitioning to visual design from political science?
Okay.
And we'll talk a little bit more about then from visual design to UX design. Yeah.
Okay. So I think for me, one of the challenge that I faced was my portfolio was not strong enough. Like it wasn't as the quality of my portfolio is not as great as the quality of those who actually went to schools like LaSalle, who actually did graphic design or visual design as their degree. All of my, I would say all of the things inside my portfolio were my own projects for student activities or just things I designed for fun. So because of that, it was quite difficult to secure an internship or a job in a bigger company. So I had to be more realistic and be open to joining a startup. And honestly, joining a startup is great because they are more open to giving you a lot of responsibilities, and they also encourage you to do things beyond your role. So you learn a lot in a short period of time. So I would say that at first it felt like I was disadvantaged because I didn't have the formal background for graphic design. But afterwards, it kind of became a blessing because it allowed me to explore so many other roles and allowed me to hone on my UX skills as well.
Well, I think you really hit the right notes over there, because we have so many live audience joining us tonight. We're totaling about 40. We have about a handful on Facebook right now. So welcome everyone. This is Dalen, your host, and Atiqah, Senior UX Designer at Shopee. And tell us a little bit about your transition from visual design or graphic design to UX design. What were some of the more challenging moments doing?
Okay, so I would say that some of the more challenging moments, I think there's some differences when you decide how do you decide whether something is good visually and whether something is good in terms of UX. So I think they both have different sets of challenges, right? So in visual design, it's more subjective. It's more about, does this look good? Does it meet the branding? Does it deliver the message that we want to say, for example? Whereas for UX design, I had to support it more with data. Like, is it something that the user genuinely feels is easy to use? Or is it something that I design because I feel it looks good? Like, it's based on my hypothesis that's not validated by any user. So I would say that that's one of the challenge, because also working in a startup, right? You don't necessarily get the resource for access to the users, right? So this being an important part of UX, sometimes I had to take shortcuts, right? So whereas when I was designing for visual design, there wasn't really a lot of shortcuts taken because I didn't have to talk to users. I just had to design based on the requirements given to me. Yeah, and it's okay that we didn't have the resources also, because all I needed was the software. All I needed was the computer. But when I did UX, sometimes I don't have the resources needed to properly like go through the whole UX process, which was quite difficult for me also, because I know what was the ideal UX process. This is what my senior UX designer was telling me. He was saying, okay, you need to do this. You need to do research. You need to talk to your users. You need to validate your hypotheses with testing and all that. You need to collect data afterwards to make sure that your design solution is actually fixing the problem, right? And then when I attended the course with Dalen, he reiterated the same stuff. Like, you have to go through this whole process. So I guess the challenge was knowing that there's an ideal process, and then working in an environment that doesn't always support that ideal process because of limitations in terms of resources. So it's something that I didn't face in graphic design because what I needed was the tool. Yeah, but in UX, there's a lot more other things that I didn't have access to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you face similar challenges when we were both at Razer, and maybe let's talk a little bit more about your gaming interests, right? Because you mentioned you're a big fan of you're a gamer.
Yeah.
I'm a gamer as well, and that's why we somehow ended up in one of the companies actually let their employees game during lunch hours, which is Razer. So yeah, tell us a little bit like how you're inspired by gaming, or like how does gaming help you with your role as a UX designer?
Okay, so right, to be honest, okay, I did start gaming at a quite young age. I think when I was in primary school, it was games like, I think Neopets, if you can consider that a game, and RuneScape, which is MMORPG. I don't know what the full form is.
It's called MMOs these days.
Yeah, MMOs, right? And then I also played some PlayStation games like GTA, Spider-Man, and all that. And then when the first time I got my paycheck as a graphic designer, I bought a gaming PC so I could finally play the games I wanted to try, like Skyrim, Borderlands, Left 4 Dead. And these days I play games mostly for social reasons. So right now I'm playing a lot of Valorant. Yeah. So I would say that before this, when I played games, I wasn't always analyzing the graphics or the UI or the UX. I just thought, okay, this is a game I like to play and it's fun, right? But then as I go through my UX journey, I started to pay more attention to these things. And I realized that UI and UX is actually a very important part of games. And that's actually I mean, you just go on LinkedIn, right? And you can search for names of game developer companies like Ubisoft, Epic Games, and Riot Games. And you'll see that they do hire UI UX designers for a good reason, because games are so visual, right? So it's so important that the UI and the UX is very it's easy for the user. Okay. So I noticed, so after getting into UX design, I did start to observe more UX patterns in games. So for example, there's some design patterns, right? Menus usually take center stage, and they tend to have similar functions as well. Like usually it's start new game or load a game, or maybe choose a game type, and then settings and exit, right? Just simple, the most basic functions that you need in a menu. And then they also tend to have really good onboarding as well. So if you notice, I'm going to take a simple example like Candy Crush. Okay, it's a mobile game where you have to swipe some candies and then match 3 or more, and then it will disappear, right? So if you played Candy Crush before, you'll notice that the onboarding process is actually quite good. They don't use a lot of words. They just show visual guidance so that you know just by looking that you actually have to swipe the candies to match them. So I think that's one example, right, for a mobile game. And then there's also a lot of other examples in PC games where they tell you like the basic movements you need to do, how to run, how to crouch, and so on. But even if they don't have onboarding for these basic movements in PC games, I also noticed that sometimes you don't need the onboarding, because usually, right, the key binds for these basic movements tend to be very general and the same across most games. So for example, in PC games, if you want to move around, you press WASD, right? And then every other key is positioned around that for easy access, right? I mean, yes, you have WASD. It doesn't make sense to then use backspace for jump, because backspace is all the way to the right. Whereas it makes more sense to use spacebar for jump, because it's a lot more easier for you to access it with your thumb. And then you could use left shift to run or walk, and like control to crouch. So all these kind of things, I didn't really pay attention at the start. But then the more I learn about UX and the more I play games, I realized, oh, it makes sense that it's designed this way. It's all deliberate, right? There's a reason why things are designed this way. It's not a coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when, especially when you mentioned WASD, which is the standard movement control for games. That actually borrows from the principle of affordance, right? So don't try and reinvent some other button combination, because everyone is already so used to the WASD for movement, especially in first-person shooters. On the PC. And I remember studying game design back in school. They also mentioned about like how important onboarding is, because if you don't do it right for the first 15 minutes, you lose interest of the gamer, which is the user, right? As we talk about it. So super important to make sure that people understand the game mechanics, but also get like the first reward or the dopamine hit in the first 15 minutes of them playing the game itself. That's really fascinating. And I know you're still a gamer and you still continue to play games, as you mentioned, like Valorant. Who would you say do game UX or UI very well? And maybe for the benefit of those who don't know the difference between UX and UI, perhaps just also explain like what's the difference between game UX and game UI. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I think one example of a game that does it quite well, maybe I won't take games like Valorant or Overwatch and all that, because I think there's a specific type of people who play those games. But I think maybe more casual games like Among Us, for example, it's quite a simple game, right? And then it's available on mobile, on PC, and I think a lot of people were able to hop onto that game quite easily and figure out how to play it, even though there's not a very, like the visuals are not great. It's very simple, right? And the controls are also simple, but somehow you just know how to use it without so much onboarding as well. Like on the phone, okay, I've never tried it on the phone, but then on the PC, like it was quite straightforward to know how to move. And from the game, you can figure out like which parts, like what needs to be interacted with, because there's a map, for example. So it's very simple and easy to use, and you don't have to be an avid gamer to understand how it works. But then again, like I also, I'm not sure how the mobile version works. I've heard that it can be a little bit tricky to navigate around the map. So I'm only speaking from the PC perspective, yeah. So in terms of difference between UI and UX design, so maybe if I talk about it more generally rather than specific to games, I would say that UI design is more visual. So it includes things like typography, like icons. Some of the things that you will see in branding are also in UI design. Things like button colors, button sizes, style guidelines, these are more UI design. Whereas UX design would be more, I would say it takes more into consideration user behavior and flows, and also things like, what do you call it, error messages and all that. Yeah, so UI is more visual, UX has more to do with the flows and happy flows and error flows, and yeah, it's more holistic, I would say.
Okay, that's really
Yeah.
cool. And did any game titles, particularly impress you in terms of like UI design or even UX design? Yeah.
I think for me, Skyrim was one of it, because okay, so Skyrim, for those who don't know, it's this open world game where you're in this fictional world and you're a dragon slayer. Okay, so you go around and then you have to complete some side quests and main quests. And what I like about the game is that it's designed in a way that it accommodates to so many different types of gamers, right? You could be someone who likes to, let's say, maybe you like to get lost in a big world. You just want to open treasure chests and loot things and kill stuff and only do side quests. Like you don't care about the main storyline. And the game is designed in a way that you can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that because it's open world, right? But at the same time, it is also designed in a way that that allows people who, let's say, they want to complete the quest, right? It is designed for those gamers as well. So that, for example, there are markers on the UI that shows you where the next quest is. And you don't even have to look at the map. It's like at the top of the screen. All the user has to do is shift their view a bit to see whether they are facing in the general direction of the quest, for example. So, but it's not like in your face, like it's just there in case you do want to complete the quest. So that's why I say it's great. Like, yes, they have the UX design to guide gamers who want to complete the main quest, but they don't stop other types of gamers, those who are more adventurous, who want to explore things and do things with no rhyme and reason. Yeah, so I think that's quite great.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like that UX is pretty universal, right? Like you can find it in games, you can find it in apps and websites, you can find it in other things as well. So it really sounds like it's quite universally applicable. Have you actually applied UX outside of your work or your job?
Okay, have I applied UX outside of my job? I have actually. So I think this was back when I was doing some tutoring for students in math, actually. So I realized that what I was doing is that I was teaching them from a way that made sense to me, and I wasn't lesson planning basically, but I realized that if I take UX principles into consideration, I need to understand that my students are like the users, and I need to design a lesson across their needs and understand what makes sense to them, use the vocabulary that makes sense to them, and also teach in a way that makes sense to them, not necessarily what makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that's like one of the things that come to mind.
So you purposely sort of tweak your approach.
Yeah.
And what was it sort of like based on? Like, was there a particular thing you learned from them or an insight or something like that?
So what I did was actually ask them questions specifically, like, okay, basically what I didn't do in the past was I didn't take feedback from them. I just taught them And then, students, right? Like especially young students, sometimes they don't tell you if they don't understand something, right? Especially if it's tuition, like they're tired from school, they just want to get it done and over with. They won't like actively tell you that this is something that they don't understand. So I guess if you consider user interview and survey as part of the methodology, I tried to ask them, I took a more active approach and asked them, okay, what exactly with this class is that you're confused with, and what can be done better? And what do you enjoy from the class? What can I continue? Yeah, so what I realized is that sometimes when you're teaching, you kind of feel pressured to complete so many topics in one go because there's a test deadline and all that, right? But then when you do that, right, the students end up not understanding maybe 80% of it, perhaps because they're tired from school, like so they don't pay attention as much. So it's still okay to reduce the amount of content that you teach in a class, but maybe they understand a higher percentage of it, and then they feel more prepared and also more confident. So that's what I learned.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's good to hear your teaching experience. And now let's speak a little bit about your current job at Shopee. You've been there for a couple of years. You work on different parts like of the app itself. Like, you want to tell us what you go through on a day-to-day basis or on a weekly basis?
Okay, sure. So I think that there's a bit of a difference now though, because in the past, before the pandemic, we would go to the office, right? So these days it's work from home. Hopefully we can go back to the office once the restrictions are lifted, but maybe I'll share my experience working from home the past year. Usually what I'll do is at the start, I mean, there's always a weekly meeting for different features and different product groups. So I would attend those, and we would share like our progress for projects with each other and with the managers. And I think it's also a great way for us to understand what projects other people are working on, in case there's a way for you to collaborate if there's some overlap. Yeah. And then I also do like a checkup with the project managers and the developers, because in Shopee it's quite collaborative. So you do have the opportunity to work very closely with PMs and developers to check on the progress of different projects. Yeah. So sometimes I would say a lot of my job involves the UI part of the process. So definitely I use a lot of Figma, and then I make sure that all my designs are following the design guidelines and it's following the product requirement documents. I don't really do a lot of research because my job is focused more on UI. So yeah, I would say that's mostly what I do in Shopee.
Would that be like a project you're particularly proud of that we can actually see on the current Shopee app if we're Shopee users?
Okay, so one project that I'm quite proud of is the login process for Shopee on the web. So before this, the login process was a bit not the best experience. So for example, right, you had the OTP. Okay, you have one form, okay? And in that one form, you have to fill in your name, your email, your username, your phone number, and the OTP verification, right? And then and you also have to fill in your password 2 times in that one form. So can you imagine, like, you fill in everything already, and then you hit like send for the OTP, right? And then the moment you key in the OTP and you press next, oh, something's wrong. Maybe your email is invalid. So now you change your email. Then you press next again. Oh, looks like you forgot to re-enter your password, because sometimes the forms, they will clear the password when you have to fill in something, right? Okay, so now you re-enter your password. Once you press next, oh, now your OTP has expired. So it's like one form for everything, and it wasn't really the best experience, and it caused a lot of issues because I think it caused quite a bit of dropouts also, because if you can't sign up, then what's the point, right? There's all these issues going on. So what we ended up doing was changing the login and the sign up flow to something that is more step by step, mostly because the OTP was getting in the way. and all the different errors were getting in the way. So once you do it step by step, it reduces the dropout. Yeah, and if the OTP is expired, at least all your other information that you've inputted is not expired. Whereas in the past, when you have one error message, then it all affects the entire form.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We've all gone through really bad forms, and we at some point we might have given up on registering or actually signing in to a form because the experience is so poor. And so thank you for saving us from that. And in case those who are not familiar with Shopee, Shopee is like a marketplace where you can buy all sorts of goods and actually procure them. Usually they run a lot of sales and they do a lot of heavy advertising, and they are a competitor of Lazada, which is these are the two apps in Southeast Asia that are quite dominant in e-commerce. So I was just wondering, how would you sort of like describe the design culture in Shopee itself?
Okay, so I would say that I think the design culture in Shopee is always evolving. Because I've been in Shopee for around 3 years now. So what it was like in the past is quite different from what it's like now. I think in the past, we function in a more lean group across the entire Shopee, not just design team. So it felt more like, it was like go, go, go. Like you just had to complete everything really, really fast, right? And I'm not like, sometimes we do take a little bit of shortcuts, yeah. But these days, I would say that we focus a lot on optimizing processes. So for example, we prioritize design guidelines, we prioritize having illustrations that are consistent across the app, the web, so that the branding is very consistent, right? And we also, I would say that we also take learning as a very important part of the work as well. Like in the past, I think we didn't really have enough time because we were focused more on like delivering projects. But these days we have things like Shopee Design Talk every month, which all of us would attend, and everyone, like different people, would have the opportunity to share projects that they are proud of, so that we could inspire other designers and motivate them to also participate in projects that are fulfilling to them. Yeah. So what else? I think that we're also something that we are quite mindful of is also like the diversity. So I think in the design team, at the start I was one of the few minorities, but now it's getting more and more diverse. So it's great. We have members from Korea, from of course Malaysia, Singapore, China, and Indonesia. In the past we had some from India as well, but they've already left. So yeah, it's quite diverse.
And thanks for sharing that. Got two questions related to joining Shopee, and someone in the audience is asking, what does Shopee look out for in a UI UX designer's portfolio? Because I know maybe not so recent, but maybe a couple of months ago, Shopee held like a design challenge to recruit designers, and I know you were sort of part of that process as well. So what does Shopee look out for?
I think what Shopee looks out for is quite similar to what other companies look out for in a UI UX designer's portfolio. Okay, I think the reality about in Singapore is that in general, you do have to make sure your portfolio is quite visual, right? You should have some UI in it, and it should be quite visually pleasing as well. So I think quite a few of the Shopee designers do have a visual background, so it does put them at an advantage. So, but at the same time, I think we are also shifting towards trying to get more research inside. So if you could supplement like your visual, like your case studies with your process, that would definitely help you a lot as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And with regards to being promoted from, say, a junior UX designer to a senior UX designer, someone is asking, what is the requisites, or what are the requirements for someone to be promoted from junior to senior?
Okay, so I think, so we do have like a guideline in terms of what skills you need to have to be considered junior, senior, and so on. So I don't think I'm allowed to share too detailed, but I can say that generally seniors should be able to do things on their own without much guidance, and they're able to initiate things and also initiate, let's say, improvements, not just to your own work, but also towards optimizing processes so that it helps other designers. Yeah. And a lot of self-initiative as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like definitely being more independent contributors of their own, but also possibly, I hear you say before, being able to actually direct their juniors.
That's true.
Guide them to an extent.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. And someone's asking, as part of your design process, do you rely on any platforms or websites to get design ideas and inspiration?
Oh, definitely. So, okay, so I think as a UX designer, right, one of the important things that you need to do is competitive analysis. So the apps that I refer to are competitor apps. So the problem with Shopee is that a lot of the competitor apps are in other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, even China. So I might not have access to it. So when it comes to those kind of apps, what I like to do is either I Google, sometimes you can Google for screens, but they tend to be outdated. So I'll get help from people from each country. Like we have this team called CX, Customer Experience Team. So they're the ones who do most of the research. Sometimes I would request from them the screens of these apps so that I can have some benchmarking and also some inspiration in terms of what we can do better. And I also refer to websites like Dribble. So Dribble with 3 Bs, right? And also Behance. The thing about these two websites though is that the kind of examples you see there, they do look visually pleasing, but they might not have the best UX. So you should take it like with a pinch of salt. Like you shouldn't assume it's the best design, but you could refer to it as something that looks visually pleasing. And then on your own, you have to decide, is the UX for this good? If not, how do you adjust it to your app's requirements so that it works well? Yeah. And also using a lot of popular apps, I think that also helps in understanding good UX, like apps like Facebook, maybe even TikTok, Instagram, because these are the apps that a lot of people are using, right? So the kind of interactions, the kind of flows, and the kind of wording that they use is what people are used to. And the thing about UX is it's not always about being so unique and like to completely recreate something, right? The point about UX is that it makes sense to the user. So there is no harm in getting inspiration from popular apps and trying to recreate some of the design patterns so that it makes sense for the users.
Yeah, I certainly second that point. I mean, if you look at an app like Tinder, there's so many apps that copy that swiping left and right mechanic, including games as well. There's some really interesting combination. And I was just wondering, in doing your design for Shopee and through the CX team where they do the research, someone's asking if there's a shelf life to the research. Like, are you conscious about the shelf life, or if there is a shelf life?
I'm not sure if there's a shelf life actually. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question, but I do know that they do collect, we do get updated about new data like weekly. Sometimes it's from the CX team, sometimes it's from other teams that collect user feedback. So yeah.
And in that case, someone's also asking if you have a favorite UX or UI designer.
Do I have a favorite UX or UI designer?
Yeah.
I think that I don't have a specific favorite UI or UX designer, but I really like Apple products. I just think that they are designed really well. Like the attention to detail is great. It feels premium, and it's not just the hardware, but it's also the software. Like the operating system is so easy to use, and it's very seamless across all the products, right? It's not like I know I'm a gamer and I use PC for gaming, but when it comes to like a really good design, I much prefer Apple products. Yeah.
Yeah, because we use that for work. So
Yeah,
we do spend more time at work than maybe in front of the computer or gaming.
yeah, that's true.
Um, I was also wondering, someone's asking about your login success story. Can you share another significant success related to any UX metrics achieved, like where you actually had to measure and make a visible improvement? Yeah.
So let's see. Mm, maybe I can share about something related to internal products in Shopee. So it's something that's not consumer facing, but it's used by people internally in Shopee. So I can't really reveal too much about what the product helps with, but I would say that it's a success story because it really helped to optimize the process for Shopee staff. So something that previously took perhaps maybe 1 or 2 weeks to get the task done, with this product, right, with this internal system, they were able to complete it much faster in maybe 1 or 2 days, because it cuts down a lot of the, I would say, like the hierarchy that they have to go through to get certain information. Like this is like a software where they can get all the necessary information with filters and all that. Yeah, rather than having to email someone to get data about something. Yeah.
That sounds like an important productivity project.
Yeah.
Really glad that you use it outside of the standard scope of serving consumers. And just to maybe ask a little bit about the education piece on UX design, is degree, someone asked, is degree like an important factor to becoming a UX designer? Like, do you need to have a degree in UX design or design?
Okay, so I think there is no specific degree for UX design, but if you do look at job openings for UX design, you might see things like human computer interaction preferred, or like some form of computing programming degree, maybe even psychology and all that. But I would say that typically, the more established companies, they might see that as a requirement. But if you don't have it, you could supplement it with relevant years of experience, work of experience. Whereas I think for other companies, they might have it in the job description, but it's not something that's set in stone. So let's say you have perhaps you do have, let's say you have some portfolio you have a lot of case studies inside, like your own personal case studies. You could use that to actually apply for companies like startups. So I would say that if you don't have the necessary formal education, it's still okay, but you need to be, you have to be quite realistic with the kind of companies that you apply for. Yeah, you can't just go straight for Facebook, for example, because I think they're more stringent in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like I tell everyone, don't apply for Grab, for Facebook or Google as your first job. I guess they got their fair pick of like designers who want to work for them. So they wouldn't hire anyone junior. Cheryl from the audience is asking, does Shopee need you to have a degree to be a UX designer?
Okay, I'm not sure if you need a degree specifically, but I do know that
have you had colleagues who don't have a degree but are working in Shopee?
I see. I think, diploma holder. Okay, I think I cannot confirm or deny this yet because I don't know the actual information about this. But if it's something that, Cheryl, if it's something that you're really interested in, I can help to find out for you. Yeah. And I think you can also consider internship first, because I mean, it also depends on which stage of the career you're at, right? Because if you're, let's say you're a fresh graduate or you're a diploma holder, are you a fresh graduate for diploma, Cheryl? No. Okay, I think you could still supplement it with like a strong portfolio is one of it. And you could also consider enrolling for boot camps that gives you certifications for UX. So I think that could help you as well.
Well, I think as a diploma holder myself, I think don't necessarily be held back by whether you have a degree or you have a diploma. Don't let that be your glass ceiling. I've actually gotten jobs in tech as high as a product manager, actually without a degree. And I had to explain to the organization I was hired for that I was working on my degree. But I think as long as you can demonstrate you have the relevant problem-solving skills and experience, they'll be quite open to helping you and giving you the opportunity, especially startups, which are also very hungry for new talent. So someone's asking, like, this extra certification in areas like human-computer interaction or UX writing, does it actually help you be more employable?
Okay, so for my case, I think my certification for UX did help me a lot. So it opened doors for me.
Talk about it. Like, it doesn't have to be like, yeah,
sorry?
I know I no longer teach that, but then
like it did help me, but I also know of people who took extra certification, right? But it didn't necessarily help them in employability. Yeah, so I think it really depends on the company that you're applying for and who your hiring managers are. Yeah, so but I would say that in UX, I mean in Singapore, right? I think as long as you have the necessary experience and a strong portfolio, necessary experience, I would say maybe you can consider internships, or you can consider trying to figure out how your current job role is relevant to UX. So for example, if you're a copywriter, you can use that for UX writing. You don't necessarily need a certification in UX writing to transition into UX writer. Yeah.
I will share from the perspective of looking at how we help our students transition. And I always tell them it's not about the certificates, it's really about your portfolio and your ability to answer questions in the interview itself. So it demonstrates your understanding. So while certificates are nice, like it gets you in the door, a good portfolio does the same thing, right? It also helps get you in the door and have those conversations.
Yeah. So when you talk about interviewing, that's so true. Like portfolio is one of it, and interviewing is so important because the way that UX interviews are conducted is quite different from other jobs. You have whiteboard challenges, you have take-home design challenges, and you need to be able to understand how to succeed in these challenges and do it really well so that you can go through your interview process smoothly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we take great care in preparing our students for that. And someone's asking, do you think UX in Singapore is like too saturated? There's too many UX designers. Yeah.
I would say that it's saturated in terms of generalists, but I also think it's because of the state of the design maturity in Singapore right now. Because I think it's still focused more, like we do expect a lot of companies do expect the designers to be more generalist rather than specific to the roles. So but I rarely see, in terms of like specialized roles like UX writers, UX research, interactive designers and all that, I think it's not saturated yet. Yeah, perhaps because the roles for those positions are not as common yet.
Someone also asked, like, before you started working for Shopee, did you work like as a freelancer before or work on any side projects? Yeah.
Let me see. Aside from working for Shopee, do you work on any side projects? I was involved in this side project called Taraweh, which is a pun for Taraweh, which is basically it's a Muslim ritual during the month of Ramadan where they pray a certain thing. So that side project it's actually just for fun. It's to help fellow Muslims get to the mosque quickly. So kind of like Grab, but to get to the mosque. Yeah.
That's a good one. And while you're on that topic, so as I understand, you did that app, and then did anything happen after you helped sort of design it?
Okay, so it was a very simple project. Like it was just for fun. There's no backing, and I think it was quite bare bones also. A lot of it was based on I would say the native design for Android. Actually, I don't think we went into iOS. So it didn't really get a lot of users, but it did get quite a few attention from, I would say, some leaders in the Malay and Muslim community because they thought that it was quite interesting that a group of youth are, young adults are interested in building apps that are helping people.
I think since we're on that topic, I would really love to hear your perspective. What's it like working in tech? Because in tech, you're already a minority as a woman, and additionally, you're a Muslim woman, right? So do you face any form of like discrimination? Do you get mansplained? Like how's it like being a minority working in tech?
Okay, so I'm quite grateful in that I have not experienced overt discrimination based on gender, race, or religion, or at least I don't think I have. I have experienced being mansplained before, and I have heard inappropriate discussions about women in like a majority men conversation a long time ago. I can't even remember who did this to me, but I do have it in my memory. So I'm quite lucky in the sense that those were the few experiences that I have. Nothing too serious, but I don't think that my experience should be used to discount the real experiences by other women in the job market, including the tech industry, which is, as we know, is male dominated. And I'm talking about this generally, not specifically from my experience or specifically for Singapore. I'm talking about like all other countries as well. Like there are issues in varying severity, such as, I mean, getting mansplained is one of it, but there's also the gender wage gap. There's the sexual harassment. There's also things like pregnancy discrimination, right? So while I have not experienced like the more serious things, I have heard about this from other people, and I am aware that this happens because, you know, there's so many articles online just talking about this. So that's why women representation is so important. And then, but I would say that for myself, as a minority within a minority, you know, like the intersectionality of being Malay, Muslim, women in a male-dominated tech industry, I do sometimes, like, I have an internal struggle too. I used to experience imposter syndrome. And even these days, sometimes I kind of question myself. So, yeah, like sometimes I wonder, like, am I really that skillful? Am I really that talented? Like, what if I'm not that great? And sometimes like there's a lot of pressure also because when you're a minority in a minority, you feel like whatever you're doing it might be falsely representative. Like people might use it as a way to represent your people of my identity, right? So what if I make one small mistake and then others might think, oh, all women are this way, or like all Muslim girls are this way. So there was a lot of pressure in that sense also.
So like, how did you sort of manage that in a healthier way?
Okay, so I think having a support system is so important, and being able to talk about my feelings to other people really helped a lot. So they helped to validate my feelings. They told me that, okay, this is normal. We've also been through this way. So basically what I did was I spoke to other women professionals who were more senior in title. I shared with them my feelings. And they said, they reassured me and said that it's okay to feel this way, but sometimes you need to be able to separate like facts from emotions. So there are some things that, and also to separate from things that are within my control and things that are not within my control. So other people's perspective of me is not something that I can control. But if it's something that is really my weakness, for example, there's a skill that I am not good enough in, then it's an opportunity for me to build on that. Yeah. So that's one of it. And also to to also join groups like Tech for She and Codette Project, because it's like a safe space for women to talk about shared experiences. It's also a great place to network and learn learn like new skills from classes. And Codette Project, for example, right, they had a women-only hackathon so that women would feel safe to sign up for an event like that, because usually hackathons are male-dominated. So sometimes women might feel intimidated to join. Yeah, so it was a safe space for women.
How would you sort of like attribute to like some of the communities that you're a part of, like Codette Project or Tech for She? Like how has it helped you grow in your career?
Okay, so it has definitely made me feel more confident. It helped me a lot with the imposter syndrome because I knew that it's something that's normal to feel, but it's something that eventually will fade away. That support system really helped me a lot. And it also gave me like the networking, right? You do have, they do introduce, I would say, role models of women in tech. So sometimes they would hold classes or talks, and then they would invite women who are more in senior positions from big tech companies to talk about their experiences. So having these role models, it gave me more confidence to achieve my goals and to believe that the tech industry is somewhere that I can belong in for a long time.
I think that's such an important point you raised over there, and the fact that you're also doing this this evening tonight, and you're also being a role model for other people who are either looking at joining the industry or are already in the industry and are maybe struggling a little bit. I think that's a very important thing to kind of practice and leading by example in this sense. We have questions around education again, and some are asking, you know, if I was a front end web developer and I want to go into UX, how can I prepare my portfolio? Because most of my work is experience as a developer.
I see. I think there's a few ways you can go around doing this. So, okay, front-end developer who wants to go into UX, right? You can go into UX directly, or you can also consider going into, because I know that some UX teams, they do hire UX developers specifically. So that's something that could help you, like something that's more accessible for you also, because the skills that you have would be relevant for that position. But I would say that a lot of UX roles, they will value your programming experience because it shows that you have an understanding of how front end works. So when you design, it means that you understand what is feasible or not technically, like in terms of the tech part. And it also shows that you would be able to communicate with the front end designer better, if maybe even the back end designer, because you understand the tech terms better. So a lot of UX roles actually, I would say they will value that experience. So in your portfolio, it's okay to show that you have that experience. And I think it would really put you in an advantage as well. In terms of the part that you're missing, perhaps it's the more visual part. I would say that depending on which, like if you're I guess if you're a fresh grad, it's okay to have your own case studies, like your own projects that you work on, and try to follow the UX process. Like just refer to other portfolios from other successful UX designers, see how you can follow the structure, like how they storytell the case studies, and then use that as inspiration to build on your portfolio. But I would say if you're more in like the middle of your career, I think it also depends. Like if you're in the middle of the career and you are willing to go for an internship or a more junior position, you could still go through that route. But I think if you want less of a junior role, right, then you have to consider having case studies that are actually real products, not just your own projects. So yeah, that's my tip.
Yeah, I second Atiqah on this. There's actually a very specific role called UX engineer. Some big tech companies actually do hire that. That means you need to have front-end web development experience, but you also have knowledge on the aesthetic side and the UX side. So it's actually a actual job scope. So you can still do UX even though you're in front end. You probably need to go for a course or a program to pick up some of the UX skills and to practice that, and probably need to do some reading as well. I think there are many people who ask about the transition process, but perhaps we'll take it after the course. And I was just wondering if someone's asking you about your career aspiration, you know, after working for Shopee for 3 years, where do you see yourself moving? Not to a different company, but rather like the role itself. Like, do you see yourself becoming a product manager or project manager? That's what this person is asking.
Okay, so for myself, I'm actually quite interested in going into a more managerial role because I feel looking back at my experience, I realized that I quite enjoy mentoring interns and juniors and teaching them how to succeed in their roles and teaching them how to do well in interviews and all that. So I find that that part of my work quite fulfilling, and I enjoy that a lot more than designing for products and features. I mean, I do enjoy UX design, of course, but I think the managerial part, the mentorship part, it feels more fulfilling for me.
Well, then we're very lucky to have you as a co-instructor because you have to do that outside of your work. And someone's also asking, like, in general, as sort of like a strategy, if you're a beginner, is it better to begin as a generalist, as a UX designer generalist, and then, or is it better to be very specific, like, hey, I want to be a visual designer or a UX researcher? Yeah.
Okay, so my answer to this is because of the design maturity in Singapore, I would say that it's better to be a generalist first, because a lot of the roles in Singapore do tend to be more general in nature. I think you rarely see roles like junior UX writer. You rarely see like junior UX researcher. I mean, it might exist, usually for bigger companies, which are harder to get into. So I guess just to increase the probability of you landing an interview and doing well also, I think there's no harm in focusing on being a generalist.
Yeah, I see this as being pretty consistent, even as we talk to some of our guest instructors who are specialized, like now they are proper like senior researcher in a company and all that. They say when they started out, it's always generalist. So even if you're very good at research, some of our students have market research background. We tell them still, please say you're a UX designer, apply for UX design roles, but say, hey, you're coming from a strong research background. They'll still hire you because of your research background, or they'll hire you for your visual design background. They'll hire you for your writing background or your technical front-end knowledge, right? Depending on what skills you're coming from. But you kind of do still need to know the entire UX design and can execute that process from end to end in this case. Someone's asking, like, in your line of work, as you're doing UX, how do you force yourself to change the way you see, things? Because this person, she's in graphic design, and she finds it hard to change the way she approaches UX work and kind of switch lens. In her own words.
Let's see. So when it comes to switching, how do I force myself? I think for UX design, it's very important to have the user in mind, right? So I guess maybe for my case, because I wasn't like formally trained in graphic design, so perhaps the switch for me wasn't too difficult because I wasn't too subscribed to like the processes and all that for graphic design. Yeah, because for me it started out as a hobby that turned into like a two months internship that eventually became like 1 year of work experience. Like I wasn't formally trained in graphic design, so I'm not sure if my experience will be too relevant for her. But I guess always one important thing to note is to always have the user in mind. And when you're designing, consider how the user perceive your product, because you're designing for them, not for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And thank you everyone for the questions itself. I'd love to ask Atiqah one final topic and one question about designing for Muslim countries. I believe as a minority, as a Muslim woman, you might have been asked in your job and in your role to actually be part of the design process for designing for countries that are majority of a Muslim population. Do you have any advice or tips for people who are designing for such a population, right, and for such countries?
Yeah, so I think when you're designing for a majority Muslim community, it's important to take note of the general sensitivities as usual, like if you're designing for a specific culture, you should take note of the nuances and the sensitivities of that culture, right? Because it's part of localization. So maybe something specific to Muslim majority countries would be to avoid like taboo images, for example. So just to give an example, there's this Chinese e-commerce company called Jingdong. And in China, I think the mascot that they use is a dog. But then when they bring over the app to Indonesia, they change the mascot to something that looks more like a horse. Because I think because images like a pig and dog is seen as taboo in the Muslim community. Yeah, and also to avoid showing visuals of people who what the community would consider as dressing immodestly. So these are the kind of general sensitivities. And also, I would say that also designing with inclusivity in mind, so that there's representation of different identities. Because like, let's say in Shopee, for Shopee, right, we do operate in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore, where there's a sizable Muslim community. So that's why I think in the illustrations, one of the designers in Shopee, her name is Nisrina, she helped to create illustrations that included Muslim women inside. So it's not just about like different skin tones and different races and different genders, but also different religions. So including that kind of illustration helped to create a sense of representation and inclusivity for the branding. Yeah.
I think that's really great, and to be mindful of being inclusive, to be mindful of like taboo topics, and not designing for that. What about as a user, right? Like, who do you think does this very well when designing for, say, a Muslim person like yourself? Which apps or that you've used you think sort of localize very, very well?
Oh, okay. So I can answer this from different ways. So there are some apps, right? For example, let's say Zalora. Okay. So I shop quite a bit on Zalora. And then you can, basically it's an online platform where you can buy clothes. Okay. And what I really like about the website is that they have a good filter section. They have the normal, like, blouses, pants, skirts, and all that, but they have something specific that makes it very easy for someone like me. For example, I can choose the filter for headscarf, and I can choose the filter for modest wear or like baju kurung, and even like prayer garments, because for Muslim women, we have a specific prayer garment that we wear to cover ourselves more modestly. So I really like that extra touch of detail. Like, I know it's a very small thing, but it really makes it more convenient for me to shop for things that I feel meets my my requirement for clothes. And also, I would say websites like, okay, Redmart, which is an online grocery website. You can actually select the halal filter. And I think they do this for Grab as well, right? The halal filter. So this helps me a lot. I mean, it's food, and it's just food, and it's just a halal filter, but it really helps me a lot, because how do I know if this chocolate chip cookie is halal and then the other one is not, right? Yeah, because it might contain lard and I don't know, but the filter would help me with that. Yeah. And yeah, so that's more for like normal lifestyle stuff. There are also other apps like Muslim Pro, which focuses more on some like ritual or ritual things like prayers and Quranic recitations. So those kind of apps, they help a lot for Muslims when it comes to doing like their worship. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think someone in the audience mentioned that in Shopee, it seems like you also have modest wear filters or something like that.
Yeah, we do. So
Okay,
I think that helps a lot.
One of the people who suggested it.
Oh, I think it was in place before I joined.
Okay.
I can't take credit for that, sadly.
That sounds great. But I mean, that is great, because the fact that the company is hiring in a very diverse manner means that they're able to sort of like be more inclusive in terms of the design. So yeah, that's definitely something worth learning. And I think with that, just gonna ask you one final question as we end off this specific interview itself. What would be an advice you would give your younger self, or to the people who are here who are very new to the industry and are trying to like transition into the industry, what would the advice be? Yeah.
Okay, so my advice to my younger self, I think for my younger self, I would say trust in the process and don't be too stressed about things not working out, or things not following the pace that you expect it to be. Because I think this is quite a general tip. Like, it's not something specific to UX, but basically, you have a goal. Like, that goal is like your main quest, right? Then think of like reaching the goal as the small little side quest to get to the main goal, right? So maybe you have a final goal, but you need to be realistic in terms of how you want to achieve it. So it's okay if it takes time. It's okay if there are hiccups along the way, because like the journey is not linear. Like it could go a different direction, but you could always like reach your goal eventually. So yeah.
It just kind of feels like Dark Souls, right? Like you can't defeat the boss, then you just respawn and
Yeah.
and then it may take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it will take a bit of time. Yeah. So I think like now, 5 years back, I wouldn't imagine myself to be where I am now. Because even along the way in my journey, I wouldn't expect to be where I am now. So as long as you are working towards your final goal, baby steps is okay too, and celebrate every little success. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with that, that's so important, because that helps you to build your creative confidence. And if you have a strong mental game, that's already like half the battle won, versus like you don't feel very confident about your work or about yourself. So thank you for sharing your experiences here today, and also your specific knowledge and skills with our audience over here. Really appreciate that. And while even adding a little bit of gaming analogies to it, spoken like a true gamer, someone said.
Let's go.
All right, so thank you so much, Atiqah, for the session. We'll now end the live session. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We will have another guest next month, so make sure you tune in to our podcast, which is Working in UX. We are on Spotify and Apple. We also upload all our webinars on YouTube, so if you want to check out previous sessions, please feel free to check out our YouTube channel. Just find Curious Core, and you'll be able to check out some of our past webinar sessions as well. So thank you so much, Atiqah.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah. And